Oh, he hit her now. Oh, he running. He snuck her ass. That's good.
Video obtained by WDSU shows a security guard registered with the state shooting a man multiple times as he runs away from her on Saturday. It happened on the front steps of the main branch of the New Orleans Public Library on Loyola Avenue downtown.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So we have another police breakdown video, which I think is utterly fascinating. It's utterly fascinating to see how these things just kind of spiral totally out of control. Okay, whenever we do these police use of force cases, I like to go directly to the law so we can understand what we're looking for, and then we go to the actual event to see what exactly happened. So it's best for us to understand the law when it comes to police use of force, and then apply that law to these particular facts, understanding that each state has different facts and each state have different laws. But what we'll do is just look at it from an overall view from the constitutional standards that are in place and the constitutional case law when it comes to police use of force. So the two cases that are on point when it comes to situations like this are Tennessee v Gardner and Graham v Connor. And both these cases are Supreme Court cases that essentially explain how when a police officer uses force in a situation, how it's going to be judged under the Constitution of the United States. So the first case we're going to have to deal with is Tennessee v Gardner. Now, I got to give you a quick synopsis of facts of that case, but essentially this guy in the gray shirt, Gardner, was burglarizing a house. Police show up, they see him running out the house, so he runs out the house and he's running away from officers. Officers, as you can see, say stop and I'll shoot. His back is turned, he's jumping over a fence, officers shoot, killing Gardner. Now, Tennessee law allowed officers to shoot fleeing felons in the back. If you just committed a felony, you were running, you could be shot by officers. The Supreme Court said, well, that law is unconstitutional because for police officers to use force in that way to seize someone to make an arrest, they would have to prove that that person was what's known as a serious threat to either the officers or to members of the community. So you could, in essence, shoot somebody who's running away, but only if they were a serious threat to either officers or members of the community. So let's say if Gardner would have had a gun and started trying to shoot other people in front of him, then the officers could apply deadly physical force to stop him. But that was the only provision. So the Supreme Court in Tennessee v Gardner said, if the police officers are going to use deadly physical force against somebody who's running away, they have to be certain that that person poses a serious threat to either officers or the members of the community. If not, then you cannot use deadly physical force. And so what happened to Gardner was unconstitutional, and the Tennessee law was struck down as being a violation of the U.S. Constitution. So no officer in the United States can shoot a fleeing felon in the back unless they can show that that fleeing felon posed a serious threat to either the officer or other members of the community. Now, this has been known as the fleeing felon rule. Every state, every jurisdiction in the United States must follow this rule. Simple enough, right? Now, if you're in law enforcement, you know this rule well because they teach it to you at the academy. Tennessee v Gardner, it's a staple. If any time you're trying to teach officers how to use force in a constitutional matter, you got to mention Tennessee v Gardner. Now, we have another case that we have to also mention, which is Graham v Connor, and that's also in the 80s. Now, in this case, the court developed what's known as the objectively reasonable standard. And in that case, the court says every officer who uses force to subdue someone or uses force in any way will be judged under what's known as the objectively reasonable standard. Now, that standard is, quote, under the standard, a particular use of force must be judged through the perspective of a reasonable officer facing the same set of circumstances without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, and be based on a totality of facts that are known to that officer at that time the force was used. So the objectively reasonable standard says that the officer at that time can use force, but that force has to be reasonable to what other officers, not the public, what other officers would do in that situation. Now, there are factors that the court says we should use to determine if an officer was objectively reasonable, because if an officer was not objectively reasonable, then that officer has violated the suspect's constitutional rights, and that officer will likely go to jail. For instance, the George Floyd cops, they were all found to not have been objectively reasonable. So that's why they went to jail. And in most police use of force cases, if it's found that the officer is not being objectively reasonable, that officer is likely going to jail because you've committed an assault. Now, the 3 factors the court said that should be assessed, but these are not the only factors. These are just the 3 factors the court pointed to that should be assessed when determining if an officer is objectively reasonable is, number 1, the nature of the 911 call. And I usually use the difference between a cat stuck in a tree and a bank robbery. Right? The nature of the call is going to determine whether it was reasonable for the officer to use force in that situation. The second is if the suspect is resisting arrest. Suspect is resisting arrest, you would understand an officer using force to detain that suspect. That's just pretty simple. And the amount of resistance determines the amount of force the officer is able to use. Pretty simple. And the last, you may recognize, it's from our earlier case, Tennessee V Gardner, where if you're going to use force and the person is a serious threat to either another officer or members of the community, then the officer can use deadly physical force and it would be objectively reasonable under those circumstances. So evaluating these 3 factors: was a call for service? Was the person resisting arrest? Was the person a serious threat to the officers or members of the community? Then that would help you determine if that officer's actions are objectively reasonable. Also understanding the fleeing felon rule. So in this particular case, we have to use these 3 factors and the fleeing felon rule to determine what's going on with this officer. Now, another thing that I think we also have to understand about factors is that one factor can be big enough where the other 2 factors are negligent. So for instance, if the 911 call is a cat in a tree and the person is not resisting arrest, but then the person all of a sudden pulls out a firearm and points at the officer, that person becomes a serious threat. And then that factor is the most important factor. And the officer will be objectively reasonable even if the 911 call and resisting arrest was low. So understand this, these are factors and these factors can change depending on what's going on. So this is how we're going to evaluate this case. Now, you may say, well, this person is not a police officer. This person is just a security officer. This person is an officer who is licensed under state law and who is employed by the state. So police officers are essentially state-sanctioned security guards. That's essentially what a peace officer is, who is allowed to do law enforcement duties under state statute. Those are peace officers. Now, security officers employed by the state also fall into that category. The state gives them authority to carry their gun and to do their security protocols because they're being paid by the state. So they also would fall into this category because, again, they are state officials. They work for the state. If this person shot this person under, and it was found deemed to be reasonable, this person would be okay because this person is a state employee. This person's job is to protect the library as a security guard with a firearm who is employed by the state. So that's why we're going to be evaluating this officer's actions under this standard. So now we're going to look at the 2 angles that from 2 eyewitnesses who filmed this incident. And this incident happened about 3 weeks ago. So as you can see, a man is running out of the library and you have, looks like 3 people behind him chasing him down the stairs. Now he jumps down this whole flight of stairs and this woman who's not in uniform and this woman who's in uniform are chasing him. Now, this woman, I'm not sure if she's in uniform or not, but you see this woman, there's 3 women here and this man stops and he's like he's picking something off the floor. He then picks whatever he picked up and threw it at this officer at this time. Now, at this time, this officer, when he first picked it up, may have been able to respond to that incident, but he's thrown the phone, he's hit this officer, and let's see what happens next. So now he's picked it up and thrown something at the officer. But now we can't see what happens because this person ducks down. We can't see what happens. The camera goes wild and we can't see what happens. So there's another angle from the same incident from someone else who seems to have been filming from across the street. So let's see this vantage point.
Oh, he hit her now. Oh, he running. He snuck her ass. That's good.
So now you can see he's throwing something. If we zoom in right here, you can see the suspect is throwing something at this officer. She flinches and then he runs away. So now we have a person who is running away from the officer. That should start triggering Tennessee V Gardner. Does this officer, that even if this officer, because again, this could be assault against a peace officer. Right? This could be a felony. And I'm not sure what the person did inside, why they're chasing him out. But now the person's on the run. He's running. So, if we talk about Tennessee V Gardner, if you are going to now use deadly physical force to stop that person who's running, who has his back towards you, you now need to be able to articulate that this person was a serious threat to either members of the community or to other officers or to even to yourself. Now, it's going to be hard to say he's a threat to you when his back is to you and he's running. But let's see what this officer does next. This officer now has pulled out their firearm, and I can't play it, but this officer now releases 5 or 6 shots into this person's back. Seems like a violation of the fleeing felon rule from Tennessee V Gardner, right? Even though he threw a phone at you, you can't now just claim that, hey, he threw a phone at me, so that gives me the right to now pull out my firearm and fire X amount of shots into his back. That's what this officer is about to do. So now this officer, because you haven't heard the gunshots, this officer has fired 7 shots at this person, and you see all these people around. So it's not a safe environment. The person's running with their back to you, and now you've unloaded 7 shots into the public. So now that's one thing. So now you think that should be it, right? That should be it, because officers are trained to stop the threat. If there's no threat, then why are you shooting? So now this officer goes to see if she can see this particular individual again. And let's see what happens.
Damn, girl she's going down.
Now, she moves forward, lines up her firearm again, and now is going to fire 4 more shots toward the man who's running away, the fleeing felon. Now, you won't hear the shots, obviously, but that's essentially what happens.
Lord, she is wilding.
So now this officer has fired 11 shots at a fleeing felon. That felon didn't seem to be armed. Even though he threw a phone at her earlier, didn't seem to be a serious threat to members of the community or even to that officer. Seems like this officer got really, really upset at the fact that he threw the phone at her and retaliated with 11 shots. So now, before we get to what the prosecutors and law enforcement in New Orleans said, do you believe this officer was objectively reasonable in using her firearm in that situation? Looking at this video, looking at what happened, I would say no. I would say this officer is probably going to jail for the rest of her life. New Orleans, 23-year-old security guard was arrested and booked for attempted murder and other allegations on Saturday, just 3 weeks ago, after allegedly shooting a man 7 times outside the main branch of the New Orleans Public Library. Records show Kia Simmons was booked into the Orleans Justice Center jail early Saturday morning, about 9 hours after the 5:09 p.m. shooting on the 200 block of Loyola Avenue. So here she is. Simmons was booked on attempted second-degree murder, illegal use of a weapon, simple battery, 2 counts of criminal damage to property. Her bond was set Sunday afternoon at $282,000. Wow, by an Orleans Parish Magistrate Commissioner. Yeah, so this is her. She's smiling, but this woman is looking to do multiple, maybe decades in prison, because don't think she put all those other people in jeopardy. Here's the news report.
Led up to the shooting, showing Mark throw a brick at Simmons before she pulls her gun and starts to fire. In the video, you see Mark running away while being hit by 7 of the 11 bullets fired. Reports also say Simmons hit these 2 two-lane police vehicles with bullets. The police report says Mark was hit, quote, mostly in the back. In an interview with police, the report says Simmons responded to the question of how many times she fired by saying, quote, too many.
You cannot use deadly force unless you're presented with deadly force against you or to save someone else's life who may have deadly force being presented against them in your area.
Exactly. That's exactly what the law is.
In this situation, she should have called for someone else to come back. She should have addressed the individual. Once he threw the brick or whatever at her, he then turned and went the other direction. At that point, it should have ended.
Retired New Orleans Police Captain Mike Kahn says the situation should have never taken place. Simmons was arrested by NOPD and faces charges of attempted second-degree murder, illegal use of weapons, and multiple other charges. She is being held on just over $280,000 bond. Court documents show this is not the first time Simmons has had a run-in with the law. In 2018, she was arrested for criminal mischief and disturbing the peace, but had those charges refused by then DA Leon Cannizzaro. She was arrested again in February 2021 when
Well, she has a long rap sheet, huh? This is what happens when you hire criminals and give them guns.
police released this picture of her when she was hit with charges of domestic abuse battery, but had those charges refused by current DA Jason Williams.
See how the DA is refusing all the charges, don't want to prosecute the criminal. And this, because they don't prosecute her, allowed her to get this job. And to put, again, she hit cop cars. Remember, there's people on that bus. She didn't care. And she's just unloading. Crazy.
Simmons was arrested again just 4 months later in June of 2020.
Third arrest? Wow.
On a cruelty to a juvenile charge, but had those charges amended to a lesser charge and was not given a felony.
And so
that's how she was able to carry a firearm. So if you're in the United States and you got a felony, you can't carry a firearm. She was able to carry a firearm because two DAs gave her leniency, so lenient that she can go out there and do this type of job and put all these people's lives in danger. But now she's going away for a long time.
specifically in New Orleans, this is the third security officer involved shooting in 4 months.
Carl Cezanne is the executive secretary of the Louisiana State Board of Private Security Examiners. That is the board that certifies the training of all security guards in the state. The board's website lists Simmons as an active security guard who got her most recent license in May of this year and renewed her training to carry a .40 caliber weapon just 2 weeks to the day before the shooting happened. Cezanne was appointed to his position in January of this year and says he's working on a major overhaul of the state's training system that he says hasn't been overhauled since 1985.
But certainly there are instances where they're going to have to engage the public. They're going to have to know how to de-escalate a situation. They're going to have to know, the levels of the force continuum.
Cezanne says he is looking at the curriculum of other states as well as working with police and security companies on what they think need to be added.
Well, the first thing is that you can't shoot fleeing felons in the back, right? That's the simple fix here. You can't shoot fleeing felons in the back unless they are serious. You can articulate they're a serious threat to you and other people, right? That's something she should have known. She's a state employee because this is a public library. She works for the public library. She's armed for the public library. Why is she shooting this person? Why is she firing like this wildly? That makes no sense. Now, even though I evaluated this under the police use of force because it seems like she was working for the public library, she could have been working, just to be clear, she could have been working for an independent, because sometimes these public institutions hire contractors to work in the field. So, she could be working for like a private security company who also then, who then would have the contract and would staff the libraries. So that could be the case here. And if that's the case here, it's even worse because you would be looking at the law of self-defense. And the law of self-defense, even if somebody throws a brick at you and runs away, then that definitely, you don't have any authority to stop the person or do anything, right? Because law of self-defense is about you protecting yourself from the imminent threat. So, she would actually be even worse off under the law of self-defense. But I think this officer, unfortunately, she failed to adhere to common sense, to the law, and I think at the end of the day, she's going to jail. I don't think there's any way you can watch that video and determine just because you got angry, just because you got frustrated, doesn't give you the right to violate someone's constitutional rights in this way and put them in a hospital. So let me know how you feel in the comment section. Do you believe this officer did the right thing? Because I think it's hard for me to even come to that conclusion. But do you think that she should have been able to do this? I understand somebody threw a brick at her, which is dangerous. And maybe if she pulls the gun out while he got the brick, that I think is a serious threat. Somebody's trying to throw a brick at you, right? That I think you're good. But after the brick is thrown and he starts turning and going, that ends that inquiry. But let me know in the comment section what you think. Because again, I've been wrong before, but I think this is a clear case of, excessive force. And I think this woman is going to jail. So don't forget, like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I will see you next time. Peace.